The lesson objective for today is that the student will be able to express a fraction with a denominator of 10 as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100 and use this technique to add fractions with denominators of 10 and 100.
Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to the video that we're going to be talking about relating fractions and decimals. That's our skill for this week. Before we get into that, I want to talk to you for a few moments because you're going to see a change in your work starting this week. Because at this point in the school year, we shift from learning new skills to reviewing what we've already learned to get ready for 5th grade. That's kind of what we use the month of May for. So congratulations. That means that you have covered all of the 4th grade math skills. Some of them may have come really easy to you and some of them may have been a little more difficult. So we're going to be focusing in on the skills that we think were a little more difficult, but feel free to reach out to Mrs. Pepin or myself. If there's a skill we covered this year that you really need more review on, we'd be happy to hear from you about that because that's what we're going to take this month to do is get you ready for 5th grade. So instead of a different lesson each day, like you've been used to, 10.1, 10.2, instead, you're going to see a new skill every week. We're going to use our 100-day countdown packet to review it, the same skill every day for 4 days. And you'll use my videos, but we'll also use other videos on YouTube or Flocabulary, Brain Pop, anything we can find that we think will help you. We're going to review that skill every day. And then Friday, you'll have a quiz on Canvas. So that's going to be kind of the shift, which means there will be a little less work for you each day. So that's kind of a nice relief, right? So that's what I wanted to kind of let you know as we move forward. And let's get into today's skills. So today we're talking about, or this week, we're talking about tenths and hundredths. At the beginning of the year, we focused on whole numbers, multiplying, dividing, adding, subtracting with whole numbers. We reviewed that. And there are some basic ideas that translate into fractions. But then we shifted into talking about fractions and decimals, which are less than whole numbers. And we'll talk about some of those skills that are the same for whole numbers and fractions and decimals. But with fractions and decimals, some of the rules change a bit. This week, we're going to focus in specifically on tenths and hundredths because that's what you need to use for fractions and decimals is denominators that are multiples of 10. And you really need to remember how to make equivalent fractions and how to find equivalent fractions. So I want to take some time today to review that. Let's take a look at the whiteboard. On the whiteboard, I have 2 tenths equals what over 100. So how can I make a fraction that's equal to 2 tenths but has 100 as the denominator? Well, one way that you can do that is to cross multiply. So that would mean we would multiply from the bottom across to the top and then from the bottom across to the top. So we can't multiply, we don't know what's here, so we can't multiply that yet, but we could do 100 times 2 is 200. So whatever times 10, whatever number we put here, it has to equal 200. So then what number times 10 would equal 200? Well, if I'm thinking in my brain about what I know about multiplying by 10, I know that 10 times 2 equals 20. And 200 is 20 times 10. It's adding one more zero. So if I did 10 times 20, if I add one zero into that equation, then I would get 200. So I drew that in a thought bubble because you might be able to do that mental math. If you need to draw it off to the side, that's fine. But that's why I put it in a thought bubble because you might be able to do that mental math. So what number times 10 equals 200? That would be 20. 10 times 20 equals 200. So we can use cross multiplication. But with this skill, I think that another way might even be a little bit easier. And that would be when we multiply or divide by a fraction equal to 1. So multiply or divide by a fraction equal to 1. And it's very important that it's a fraction equal to 1. Because think about what happens when you multiply something times 1. 5 times 1 is 5. 27 times 1 is 27. 1,286 times 1 is 1,286. When you multiply anything times 1, you end up with the same value. So if we multiply a fraction by a fraction equal to 1, we'll get different numbers but the same value. So let's use the 2/10 and the hundredths to look at an example of that. And I'm going to need to move down on my whiteboard so that you have more space. I'm back. You have more space down here to write. So 2/10 equals what over 100? So this time we're going to multiply or divide by a fraction equal to 1. So that would mean that I would say, okay, well, 2/10 times this fraction that's equal to 1 equals what over 100? Well, I know that 10 times 10 equals 100. And what is a fraction equal to 1? A fraction equal to 1 means that it's the same number top and bottom. So 10 tenths, 10 pieces out of 10 pieces would be equal to 1. 5 over 5, 12 over 12. The same number top and bottom. So that would be 10 times 10 is 100. So 2 times 10 is 20. So 2/10 times 10 over 10 equals 20 over 100. So this week we're only using tenths and hundredths, which means your fraction equal to 1 is always going to be 10 over 10 or 100 over 100, something like that. So that makes things a little bit easier. So I'm going to erase all this and let's use that skill to do 1 or 2 more problems, because that's the one I really want you to focus on. So let's say I have 8 over 10 equals what over 100? Well, I could say I know that 10 times 10 equals 100. So I need to do times 10 to the top. So 8 times 10 would be 80. So it's that simple. You just multiply or divide the top and bottom number by the same number, in this case 10. So today you're going to do page 51 in your packet. Let's take a look at a few of the problems together. We're not going to solve them because you need to do that on your own, but let's take a look at a few of them together just to make sure you understand what you're going to need to do. So in the first problem, it says create a fraction with a denominator of 100 that is equivalent to 2/10. That's very similar to what we were doing before. Actually, that's exactly the problem that I used as the example. One thing I wanted to mention is the way they have fractions written here is next to each other. The first number is the numerator of the fraction, and the second number is the denominator. So create a fraction with a denominator of 100 that is equivalent to 2/10. So that's what that would look like. And again, that's the problem that we solved at the beginning of the video. So if you're not sure how to solve it, back it up and look at how I solved it. So here we have 6/10 plus what over 100 equals 89 over 100. Let's talk about how we would solve this. So I don't know if you remember, but one of the things that we learned is that you cannot add fractions that have different denominators. So one of the common mistakes that I see students make here is they say, okay, well, what number plus 6 equals 89? So they do 89 minus 6, and that would be 83, and they put that there. The problem with that is you can't add tenths and hundredths the way that they are. You have to give them a common denominator. So you have to make an equivalent fraction here that has a denominator of 100. So we need to make 6/10 into something over 100 before we figure out what to add. So using our skills that we learned about before, 6/10 times what over what equals what over 100. We're trying to make it into hundredths. Now remember, this fraction has to be equal to 1. Otherwise, we're not making an equivalent fraction. We're making a different fraction. So what number times 10 equals 100? Well, that would be 10. And if it's going to be a fraction equal to 1, it has to have the same number on the top. So 10 over 10. So that would be 60 over 100. Now I can add these. 60 over 100 plus what over 100 equals 89 over 100. Well, now we would do, well, what number plus 60 equals 89? So we could do 89 minus 60 off to the side. and we would get 29. So 60 plus 29 equals 89. So 60 over 100 plus 29 over 100 equals 89 over 100. So what's the missing number here? Well, it would be 29 over 100. Okay, for the rest of the page, you're going to use models. Remember to write the fractions if you need to. Write the fractions you're given like this. Okay, what fraction is equal to 3/10? And it says which fraction, so there's only going to be one. And then this one is a select all, the models that are shown by, the numbers that are shown by this model. And you do have some decimals in there. So good luck on the rest of the page. So that's kind of what you're going to need to do for day 51, and day 52 and on we'll be using the same skills but different problems, okay? And the resources that we have you looking at this week relate fractions and decimals, start having you interact with those two things, because next week we're going to get more into that. So please, of course, reach out to me or Mrs. Pepin if you have any questions or have any problems. You can post things in the comment section down below. And I'll see you next week when we talk about fractions and decimals. Bye-bye.